Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah al-kareem. Welcome to our program, Women Today. Today we have with us two honored guests. One will be joining us here in the studio, and one of our guests will be joining us via Zoom. So to begin with, I'll introduce our guest sitting with me here. We had Brother Maswood Ahmed, who is an independent and international social worker, an expert in his field who has 35 years experience in working with children and families in care proceedings and child custody matters. He has worked as a social services manager for over 17 years, mostly in local government. He's a parenting expert, a motivational speaker, a well-known community leader and media personality. Welcome to our program. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And our second guest is Sister Sana Siddiq, who will be joining us via Zoom. So Sister Sana Siddiq is a lawyer who specializes in family law. She has worked in law for 10 years and practiced as a qualified solicitor for 5.5 years. She has recently launched her own law firm, Collective Law Solicitors Limited, in August this year. Congratulations, Sister Sana.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to our audience again. So just to begin our topic today, the topic of child custody, which is quite a big topic and quite a sensitive topic, but it concerns us not only as Muslims, but also from a citizens' point of view. So we have British citizens here in the UK, so it has many meanings for us. So just to give you an overview of the Islamic view, and before we delve into our questions with our honored guests. So if we were to do an in-depth study of Islamic law, it usually reveals to us that there is no verse in the Quran that mentions custody of minors. However, you will find that classical Muslim jurists have referred to the verses of fosterage, so the verses of Rada'a, which says that the mother needs to breastfeed the child for 2 complete years. So infants are breastfed for 2 complete years. And we also learn about the rights of a child. So for example, each child has the right to legitimacy and a good name. They have the right to shelter, maintenance, and health care. In addition, mothers are obligated to breastfeed each child for at least 2 full years, or if they're unable to, they need to appoint a wet nurse. Children have a right to separate sleeping arrangements, especially adolescents. And as per the Sharia law, we are aware that the father is considered to be the natural guardian of his children, irrespective of sex. However, the mother is entitled to the custody of her son until the age of 7 years old, and of her daughter till she attains puberty. So as we can see, we have many challenges because we have the Islamic law to abide by, but also as British citizens, we have some obligation towards the civil law. And with that, I'd like to turn to Sister Sana Siddiq. I believe Sister Sana will be able to clear a lot of conceptions for us and also give us an idea of what really goes on for Muslim parents, especially in this country. And of course, after that, I would come to Brother Maswood. So Sister Sana, my first question to you: who gets priority with child custody in the UK? And I think I will link this question onto you also. So Sister Sana is joining us up here. So what is the entitlement of a father and the mother with regards to child custody? Please, Sister Sana.
No problem. So the first thing to realize is under English law, neither parent is given priority in terms of custody of the child. It's seen as a very equal division of time and responsibility towards the child or any children of a family unit. So the courts in the UK do not favour a mother or a father to any particular extent. Instead, the English courts will focus on what's in the best interest of a child. So we have a very particular statute, a legislation within English law. It's called the Children Act of 1989. And within that statute of law, there's a very particular section, section 1, which lists all the factors that an English court will consider when having to determine what is best for a child in terms of their living arrangements, who should have custody of them in the event of a family breakdown or a marital separation, and whether they should spend time with the other parent, and if so, how often they should spend time with that parent. These are all factors which the courts will have to make decisions on if the parents can't decide between themselves, but the court will not automatically favour one parent over the other. They will base these decisions on what is right for the child in accordance with that statute of law.
That's very interesting because my own view, and I don't know, I will take a comment from you, Brother Maswood, was that I always believed that mothers had more priority when it came to child custody. So it's very interesting to learn about the 1989 Act. And how about Brother Maswood? Do you have anything to say on this point?
Yeah, well, the Children Act 1989 is my bread and butter in the sense that a lot of the work that I do is part of that. So the very first principle is the welfare principle. So whenever the court is making any decisions, they have to give regard to the welfare of the child. Yeah. And they have to make sure, both in private law and public law, they have to make sure that the welfare of the child is given paramount consideration. So this is coming straight out of the law.
Of course.
So in that regard, whatever is best for the child is considered, and it's not automatic that the father or the mother is best for a child. So for that reason, you need specialists, or you certainly need professionals whenever there is involvement.
Yes.
So in private law, you have an organization called CAFCAS. They get involved to do assessments and look at what is best for the child. In other situations, in care proceedings, social workers, psychologists, and other professionals are brought in depending on the situation. So someone like myself, I would come in as an independent social work expert, and I would look at the situation, but I have to give recommendations to the judge as to what I think is in the welfare interest of the child, what is in the best interest of the child, regardless of whether it's mom or dad. So in some cases, it may be both parents are safe and they can meet the child's needs. In some cases, it may be one of the parents, father or the mother.
Right.
Both of them may not be suitable due to their lifestyle, due to whatever. So that's where the issue comes in. So you see a direct contrast here in terms of the automatic Islamic principle. But here, certainly in the British law, we have to consider what is best for the child to start with.
Thank you so much for that. It's very interesting what you're saying, mashallah, and the job that you do. And I'm amazed at how many professionals are involved, but also your role is so engaging. And I'm just curious, does that mean you are required to spend time with each individual of the family to assess things? Because obviously, you have to give your opinion for the judgment, so that must require...
Yeah, so if I come in as an independent, I mean, I've worked for years and years now in local government as a social worker, as a manager, as, in different roles. But now in my capacity as an independent, in court language, I'm an independent expert.
Yes.
So when I'm brought in, I'm not on the father's side or the mother's side or the local authority side. I am on the side of the child, in the sense that what is best for the child, and I'm independently advising the judge what I think should happen in terms of
for the child's well-being.
In terms of where the child should live, for example, or who should have custody of the child. So if I'm brought in to do what's commonly a Section 7 report, so in a Section 7 report, you're looking purely at the welfare needs of the child, what is best for the child. But there are so many different assessments that can take place. One of them is, for example, a special guardianship order. So if both parents are considered not suitable, then there are alternative options. Other relatives can come in. And when I do international assessment, for instance, sometimes people in other countries may be in a better position to look after a child than in this country, if there are care proceedings involved. Yeah. So I was, for example, working in Egypt several times, in Saudi Arabia, in Portugal, in Bangladesh,
so you've
very
seen various,
frequently. And I've just come back from India just recently, working there. So I'm all over the place in terms of international work, meaning all over the world, but also throughout the UK, I am involved. Sometimes parents, they need advice, they need guidance, they need support, they need training. And depending on what the need is, I can recommend different people to do that. Other times, it may be something I can provide. You know, I have a parenting program that I have authored myself. So where appropriate, privately I can do that, or through the local government, or, you know, through the court. That's one thing. But, you know, it's a wide field. So,
and mashallah, you're, you know, internationally you're renowned. So I think that must bring a wealth of experience. So whichever country you go to, obviously your experience throughout the other countries and with parents of all backgrounds must help you in assessing.
Yeah, so that requires, I mean, I think what it does is it gives me an opportunity before I go to a country to prepare myself, learn about the country, the culture and other things. But also, whenever I come back so enriched, even though it's a tall order, because, you know, working around the clock sometimes in different time zone and everything else. So all of that has its own challenges. But at the same time, it is very fulfilling that if I can keep a child within the family, within the wider family, then that deserves to be given a full chance, as opposed to sometimes in the case of babies, you have the alternative sometimes is the adoption option. So these are in care proceedings matters. And when parents fail to prove to the court that they are suitable to have the custody of the child or have the care of the child, then the courts will step in and think of alternative options. And sometimes they are very drastic, you know, they are draconian. Adoption is seen as a draconian option or measure. But sometimes it happens. I've had to make a recommendation only last week for a child, despite
not wanting.
Despite, if I had a choice, I wouldn't recommend it. But that's what it is. You know, I spent a whole day in court being cross-examined and so on. But I
and you had to come to a decision.
I stuck to my position that adoption was the best alternative. So it happens, you know, in different situations.
So it has its challenges, not just for the parents, but for you as a professional. And with that, I'm going to go back to Sister Sana. I'd like to ask Sister Sana, so you've heard what Brother Maswood has had to say. So I'd like to ask you, in light of that, so you've heard how Brother Maswood is saying how it's been very important, or it's paramount, to look at the well-being of the child and what's the best decision for the child. Can I ask you, Sister Sana, so what determines for you as a lawyer who the custody of the child goes to? So what is it you look for?
So as a lawyer, I wouldn't really have any professional standing in terms of making any input or decision as to where custody would go. My role as a lawyer would be simply to represent my client, whether it's the father or the mother, and to simply advocate and present their position and their point of view to the judge and to the court. So it may be a case, for example, whereby a father has come to me asking for legal representation because he has separated from the mother of the child. They can't reach an agreement between themselves as to what the living arrangement should be for the child or for the children. And for whatever reason, there's a dispute. So the matter needs to go to court, for the court to intervene and for a judge to make a decision. Now, the father who's come to me as a client may have very particular points of view that he wants to have presented to the judge for the judge to consider overall. Because as we said, there's no automatic standing to say that the mother will be favored or father will be favored. So when making these assessments and decisions overall, the court will need to assess based on an independent social worker's report or based on information from CAFCAS as to what would be in the best interest of the child. But aside from that, there may be background circumstances to the family which either parent wants the court to become aware of.
Right.
So if a father comes to me and says, the children have been living with mother and I've been working full time and I haven't been spending as much time with them, for example, previously, because I work full time or I work night shifts or whatever it may be, but I'm concerned about their safety whilst in their mother's care because, for example, she leaves them alone unattended regularly throughout the weekdays and she goes out. Or, for example, if there's concerns about alcohol consumption, drug abuse, association with dangerous individuals or criminals or anything of that nature, any degree of concern which poses a risk to the child, the parent which comes to me for representation will expect and want those views to be portrayed to the court. So whilst there's background assessments and investigations taking place in terms of the family and the household setting and the views of the children, my role as a lawyer will be to present the parent's point of view and their position to the court as to what orders they're seeking and why they're seeking that. So that would be my role as a lawyer.
Thank you, Sister Sana. And as you can see, they're two very distinct roles, Brother Maswood, yours and Sister Sana's, but also very crucial to the well-being of the child. And for me, it's an eye-opener, as I'm sure it is to our audience, that, whereas I'm sure a lot of mothers out there are thinking that they are favoured, the husbands are favoured, or vice versa, the husbands are thinking the mothers are favoured. I think, to hear from yourself and Sister Sana that it's actually the child's well-being, and for me that resonates with what Islam says, because in Islam we also look for the well-being of the child. If you study Islamic Sharia texts, you will find that the child up to the age of 7, obviously they're expected to be in the mother's care. The father's involvement is always there, but as the male child reaches age 7 onwards, they're expected to have involvement with the father. The young girl until she reaches puberty. And as we can see, it seems like though we have these rules from the Islamic point of view, I think, Brother Maswood, what you were telling us and also what Sister Sana is telling us is that that's what your work involves, looking at the child's well-being. I think we're going to be taking a break short, but if I can put a question to you, so that will give you time to think about it as we do take a break. So to you, Brother Maswood, how important are cultural or religious matters in assessments when the court makes decisions about which parents the child should live with, i.e., whether it's with the parents, a relative, grandparents, or foster carer? As we know, and you mentioned earlier, that the children don't always go to one parent or the other, or don't always even remain in the family. You had to make the decision in the interest of the child that the child needs to go into care. So that's the question I'll leave you to think with and think about. And Sister Sana, if I could ask you the question. So if you could take us through the types of child custody in the UK and how this plans out to when you're advising the parents. So for example, if you're working with the father, what would you advise him? And if you were working with the mother, then what would you advise her? So I'll leave you with that question. And I think we can take a break now, and we will see you shortly after the break. And we will see what Brother Maswood and Sister Sana have to say to us. Jazakumullah khairan. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, welcome back. And with that, I will take my first question back to Brother Maswood. So Brother Maswood, how important are cultural or religious matters in assessments when the court makes decisions about which parent the child should live with, parents, relative, or extended family, or foster carer? And if I can also ask you at the same time, so while we're doing that, if you can take us to also look at how parents can be helped when they find themselves in a situation like that. Of course, if we go off the question, I will remind you and bring you back to that, but I feel it's related.
Thank you. That's a very, very important question. And in my experience, in my long-standing experience in this field, what I found is that depending on the knowledge, experience, and expertise of the individuals who are representing you, but more importantly, those who are actually assessing you as a parent, if they're assessing you to see if you're competent, if you've got parenting capacity, if you can meet the needs of the child, and they miss out on cultural nuances, cultural practices, knowledge about the religion, knowledge about the language, and so on. Just today, a solicitor called me asking me to do an assessment of someone who is a Urdu speaking individual, and she's had assessments done before, but because always there were interpreters involved and the person assessing had no knowledge or experience of their culture, always the assessment outcome has been negative. Now, the reason, without going into detail, there is so much in culture and religion. That's what makes us a person. So sometimes people do cultural things, but they get misinterpreted, misunderstood. One example is I was teaching actually a couple just a few days ago. They came to my office. So I offer consultation where if they're in a crisis, if they're in the middle of a care proceeding or something, and they need guidance, they need support over and above what they can get from their solicitors, then that facility is available through someone like me, in confidence. So I was talking to these two Bangladeshi parents, and the mother was, while she's talking to me, I can see she's just muttering, she's just saying things under her lips, or sometimes during a break I see she's just, so automatically I know that she's probably reading some dua, she's reciting some prayers, some verses from the Quran or whatever. Now, if a psychologist was in front of her, or even a social worker, if they are not familiar with this, they would just jump to the conclusion that there's something going on in her head.
Actually, maybe that was my first thought.
Maybe she's having a mental breakdown, maybe she's just talking to herself, and all these things. And sometimes people are, they don't want to ask that because they might think if this person is going a bit psychotic, then they might, if I just mention that, it might trigger a bigger explosion on whatever. So they just write down. And that could be dreadful, that could be deadly for that person. If they go, and then
it could be detrimental to the decision.
It could be so devastating. I've seen so many assessments like that. And then when the assessment goes wrong, the parents then 6 months later they complain and this and that. To undo that simple observation, to undo that, it takes so long. So I come in, for example, as an independent expert, and then I look at that immediately. I know that somebody's missed a cultural sign. All they needed to do, just like I did as well. I said, I'm observing you saying something quietly. What's going on? And she said, I'm dua for them.
Oh, subhanallah.
She just obviously, even though
and how simple was that? You were comfortable to ask, and she was comfortable to say.
So immediately I knew that that's fine. And in fact, I taught her an extra dua. I said, do that one next time you go in front of the judge. Okay. So that's not a problem as long as you explain, and as long as people are courageous enough to pick up the signs, to discuss, and so on. So that requires courage, that requires cultural competence.
Of course,
And if you're not culturally competent, and if you're on your guard anyway, and if you think these people are crazy anyway, then it doesn't help. So choose carefully. Parents have a say. Their solicitors have a duty to look around to see who's available, who can help them. And there are lots of social workers around, independent
That's
social workers, expert psychologists and other
Yes,
specialists that you
course.
need. But make sure that they answer the right question.
Right
Make sure
questions,
that
of
they have
course,
some
yeah.
cultural awareness. Otherwise, it will be difficult. Working
Cultural
through
awareness,
interpreters
yeah.
is fine. I also work with interpreters sometimes when I'm working with people from different
yeah.
communities that I don't speak the languages of. But
It's easy
you know,
to misinterpret,
yeah,
isn't it? And it's
yeah.
easy.
So
It's so easy to
having that knowledge
misunderstand,
base,
yeah.
having the expertise, being aware, and not being afraid to ask questions
Ask,
are very
of course.
important. Equally, as a parent, if you're in dire straits and if you're in difficulty, of course it's understandable that you'll be worked up and worried and so on, but still take advice.
Yeah.
And I think your second point was, what can parents do?
Yes, and can I come back to you on
Okay.
that? So I'll give you some time to think
Sure.
about that, and I will start off, Sister Sana, on our next point of discussion. So, Sister Sana, we asked you to take us through some types of child custody in the UK, and also if you could elaborate on the situations that would be encountered by, for example, how it would be different for a father or a mother, please.
Sure. So within the English legal system, any application made to court concerning any arrangements to do with a child, they're referred to as Section 8 orders. So these can relate to requesting permission or a decision from a court for a child to live with a parent, which is commonly referred to as custody. In the courts and through legal terms, we call this a live with order, but generally it's referred to as custody. Now, sometimes custody can mean that the child lives with one parent full time and simply spends time with the other parent. So they have contact with the other parent. So it doesn't mean that if you have custody of a child, the child doesn't see the other parent at all. The courts don't tend to take that approach unless there's very extreme circumstances where the child's safety potentially would be at risk if they were to spend time with the other child.
Right.
The courts really do focus on trying to ensure, wherever it's as safe as it can be, that the child has the benefit of both parents in their life. Now, this could take the form of one parent having custody and the child spending time with the other parent after school or on weekends or evenings or some sort of arrangement like that. Or it could be that the courts decide joint custody is what would be in the best interest of the child. So where one parent is given custody of the child would tend to live with that parent full time. So that would be the child's more permanent home overall. That's where they would reside long term. And then certain dates and times would be set in stone in terms of a routine and a structure for them to spend time with their other parent, whether that's the mother or the father. So some arrangement routines may be that every Tuesday and Thursday, the other parent collects the child from school, spends a few hours with the child, and then returns them to the other parent who has custody.
Okay.
So that's how those sorts of arrangements would work.
Right.
With joint custody involved, the aim is to try and ensure the child spends as equal time with both parents as possible. Now, this doesn't mean literally down to the hour or to the minute that the time is split. It just means based on the child's age and their routine and lifestyle, depending on their school structure and things like that, they try to spend equal time between each parent. If the parents live fairly local to one another, it could be a case where the child spends half the week at mother's house, half the week at father's house. Sometimes arrangements could even mean that the child spends 1 week living with mother and then the second week living with father and keeps alternating like that. It really just depends on what's appropriate for that particular child in their circumstances. And factors such as the child's age, the distance between the parents' home, the lifestyle and arrangements for the parents as well will also be taken into consideration, because if one parent, for example, is a doctor or works night shifts all the time, it may not be practical for them to be able to take care of the children in the evenings because they simply won't be home to be able to do that. So it may be more practical for the other parent to have custody of the child if they're able to spend more time with them and to devote that time and attention that's needed for their upbringing.
Right.
And the other parent simply spends time with them around their working routine and around the child's routine as well. So there's a number of factors taken into consideration overall. And it really does have to be a very fine balance between what the parents can offer and provide and what's right for the child overall.
Can I just ask, sorry to interrupt you, but amidst all this, at any point, do you actually consider what the child wants, or does that depend on the age again?
It does slightly depend on the age, but the child's wishes and feelings are part of the welfare checklist.
Okay.
So we mentioned previously that when the courts are making any decisions on these sorts of matters, the legal statute that they refer to is the Children Act of 1989 and the welfare checklist within that. Now, part of that welfare checklist is to account for the wishes and feelings of a child. That doesn't mean that whatever the child states will be set in stone, because the reality is children are still children at the end of the day. These are very, very big decisions that are going to be made, which is going to affect the rest of their childhood up to the age of 16 or 18. So it's not something to take lightly at all.
Of course,
and the reality is it's not something that a child can decide for themselves. But it's definitely a factor that the courts will take into consideration. Now, children which are very young, inevitably it may not be suitable or appropriate to speak to them, or for a social worker or for CAFCAS to interview those children. Either they're too young to talk, or they're simply too young generally to be able to get involved in these sorts of matters.
Right,
Where a child is of an age where they can speak and articulate a view of their own, and they're considered to be able to have an opinion, then a social worker or the CAFCAS officers who are undertaking the assessments or preparing the reports may very well want to speak to the child.
Right, okay.
Now, they do try and ensure it's done in a very child-friendly way, because inevitably it wouldn't be appropriate to sit a child down at such a young age and start speaking to them about the legalities and the formalities of their parents separating and so on. But they would try and encourage them to maybe draw pictures or talk about stories of happy memories or possibly sad memories, and they would make assessments and inferences from the information the children give them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And with that, I will take the question back to you, Brother Maswood. So as Sister Sana said, you know, a lot of work is involved with the children. And so can I ask you now, so at this point, obviously yourself as the expert social worker, what would your work involve with the child? And also at the same time, how would you be helping the parents, you know, to understand how to be able to get their child back home?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very important question, so thank you for asking that. A lot of people don't understand how the assessment system works. So when a social worker goes into the home, they would be looking around for, you know, the standard of care given to the child. But also they're also observing how the parent interacts with the child, how the child interacts with the parent or both parents if they're together. And sometimes if the child is taken out of the home in care proceedings, then they would have right to see the child as long as they behave themselves, the parents behave themselves, and there is nothing in their behavior that is dangerous to the child. Then the court is duty bound to allow, the local authority is kind of duty bound to provide regular and reasonable contact with the child. And that can take place in a neutral venue, usually in a contact center. Depending on the age of the child, it can be outside in the community. So when I'm doing an assessment, then I am observing many of these interactions. So part of the assessment would include observing the child, how the parents. So one of the assessment, in fact, the assessment I spoke about earlier, where I recommended adoption, unfortunately, You know, I ensured that the parents cook a meal for the child because there were some concerns about their ability to prepare a proper meal for the child, how thoughtful they are, do they have insight, that's what we call, in terms of do they fully understand. So a lot of parents, if they get negative results, then they would be, the reports would say they're lacking insight about parenting.
Do you mean into the, so just to help me understand, do you mean insight into the child's needs and wants?
Needs of the child and the feelings and, you know, all of these things. So that's a big area that is a concern. Another, I guess within that, the other part of your question is how can parents be helped? I think a lot of the time parents, because especially, you know, going back to the cultural factor, within our community, it's seen as a very big, shameful thing if your child is involved in care proceedings, or even if there is domestic,
even if there's a divorce,
there is a divorce or separation taking place. We try to keep it all hush hush. But when you come to a professional, whether it is someone like me or others, we're all duty bound, professionally duty bound to maintain confidentiality. So it could be my, you know, few doors down a neighbor, but if they come to me as a professional, then I have to make sure that their information is not spread out in the community and so on. And any other officials, any other individuals involved, they have to give an undertaking. And if there is any breach, you have every right to complain about it.
Of course,
so make sure that you seek advice. So parents, if they come to the right people for advice, for guidance, for training, that can happen while you are in the middle of a proceeding. Then you are in a much better position. And sometimes people don't realize it. They would rather go and endlessly spend money in different areas, buying expensive presents for the child to try and win the child over, without realizing that what you really need to do is change the way you talk, change the way you communicate, or at least try and understand how the system works.
And it's you're working on your relationship really, so it shouldn't be forced. It would be natural.
But unfortunately, a lot of the time, sometimes very highly educated and professional parents, you know, I get involved and in cases where it may be doctors, it may be a barrister, it may be a solicitor. So in their day job, they might be doing a respectable profession. You know, they might be involved in a respectable. But parenting is a different science altogether.
That's right. We're not born with the skills.
And many times we don't get any training. None of us.
Either. No.
I mean, I guess I'm very fortunate in many ways that as part of my profession, I get exposed to a lot of information and knowledge and whatever. And over the years, we try and perfect it. But sometimes, you know, even social workers can get things wrong.
Of course,
So we all need
parents
guidance.
Can make mistakes.
If there is any opportunity for you to take part in parenting programs,
skills or
sometimes you can get them free. But if you're in a crisis, then try and get it whichever way you can. Go to somebody.
I think somebody of your caliber, you know, to have somebody like that in our community, in our society, available for parents.
So I regularly, those who, I mean, I consider them very lucky. Number one, if they can source or find out about me, find me. And I can't, of course, train everybody. So
of course
those who manage to get a slot, they get in the training program, whether it is one-to-one or, you know, in a group setting, or sometimes even just via telephone coaching. You are so much better off. Your behavior in the court, even your interaction with your own solicitor is so much better because you can maximize.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are running out of time. I just feel like we have so much to talk about, and you've said so much valuable. You know, we've had so much valuable advice from you and Sister Sana, and this is such an important and huge topic. I think we should definitely have more sessions on it. But I'm happy to hear that, Brother Maswood, you know, just from listening to you, I think I've realized the importance of having someone like you in our community, because it's essential that we understand the parents from the point of view of a culture and religion. And also, Sister Sana, we'd like to thank you because it's just as important for us to have solicitors who understand our religion and our background. And I think like the example you gave, Brother Maswood, you know, of the lady who's praying. It's subhanAllah, it never occurred to me, but even when you mentioned that, I thought, is there something wrong? So if I could think that, obviously if somebody who's assessing her, it's very easy to make that mistakes. But not only that, in terms of parenting, divorce rates are quite high. We face that problem in our society. So we want to be able to address these problems, and we want to be well equipped. And you know, whether we learn from you know, the British law and what services are available for us, and to also know what services are available for the Muslims in our community, I think inshallah we will find that these services will then make the transition for a child when they experience their parents going through a divorce or separation, will inshallah make it easier for the child to have that support available. With that, I would like to thank you both so much. Shortcomings, because I think there's so much you have to offer us, and we can't do it justice in this time. But I hope that our audience will follow your work and you know, follow what you do, and hopefully seek the some of the teachings that you offer. So Jazakumullah khairan to our dear audience, and Jazakallah khairan Brother Maswood and Sister Sana for joining us here today. And Jazakumullah khairan, dear audience. Barakallahu feekum, and we hope you can join us again, inshallah. Until then, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.